am the founder and CEO of Venture for Canada, and I am super excited to introduce Avery Francis, who is our first keynote speaker of the conference. Avery is a fan of growth in all its forms and has spent her career helping leaders navigate the challenging world of talent, hiring, and building genuinely inclusive company cultures. An award-winning HR leader, champion of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, Avery is a Canadian entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Bloom. Bloom is a full-service workplace design consultancy. The company helps world-best companies build great teams, hire the best talent, develop equitable hiring practices, and design inclusive recruiting techniques so people have the freedom to be themselves in the workplace. In this keynote session, Avery will explore why work doesn't work for everyone and why your best people are breaking up with old ways of working for new ones. She'll share how a foundational focus on inclusion is the path towards evolving legacy ways of working and building better workplace experiences for everyone. I highly recommend you check out more about Avery's work online. Check out her company Bloom and Bloom Academy, which is a fantastic resource for those interested in learning more about equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're so honored and excited to have Avery speak to attendees this morning. Avery, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. That was such a great introduction. Hello, everyone. I can't see all of you, but I'm hoping there's lots of great energy and everything. I am hella nervous because I know that a lot of folks that are part of this conference know their stuff. So I'm really hoping that I can add in another layer to the conversation, hopefully that you leave the session learning something new. Before we get started, I wanted to just wish everyone a good morning, and I wanted to wish you all a happy Women's Month. If you're comfortable, please put your names, pronouns, and company in the chat. Introduce yourself by choosing one of these prompts. I chose my own. For anyone that has been watching Love is Blind, I'm a huge fan of Deepti, so that is a woman that I admire. So my name is Avery. I'm the founder and CEO of Bloom. My pronouns are she, her, and we are the only workplace design consultancy that offers fractional DEI, recruitment, and HR support through the lens of inclusion, justice, and equity. I'm a woman, I am Black, and I am survivor. These are all parts of my identity that I connect with deeply, and these are parts of my identity that have informed my lived experiences, good and bad, and I take them with me everywhere I go. These are my parents. My dad immigrated here from England, and my grandma immigrated here from Jamaica. My mom grew up in a small mining town in Ontario called Kirkland Lake, and they met outside of Ontario. Ontario back when they were 16 years old, and navigated a tremendous amount of racism and discrimination throughout their entire relationship. It's hard to believe, but interracial marriages weren't actually legalized until 1962. Specifically within the United States. To give some people more context around this, my dad was actually born in 1962. And it wasn't until June 12th, 1967 that it was legally made legal, nationwide throughout the United States. Sorry, y'all, I'm nervous. And this is me. Because interracial relationships were only made up for 3.4% of all marriages at the time, I was a bit of an anomaly throughout my entire educational experience. I'm sharing pictures of me at a young age because I think it's important around context, around my lived experiences as a child through to my lived experience as an adult, especially in the workplace. I can remember being treated differently from a very young age. I had to navigate microaggressions, racism, and bias through school, in sport, and in different communities. And like most girls, I had to navigate, especially Black girls. It was a part of my everyday experience. As a result, I had a hard time fitting in, finding community, and feeling like I belonged. I liked gymnastics, but didn't like how my teacher made fun of my dark knees. I really liked school and learning, but I didn't like how my teachers assumed that I wasn't from Canada. So they made different additions and accommodations for me to be a part of like the ESL learning group, or wouldn't necessarily spend as much time with teaching me around English and reading because they didn't think that English was my first language. Back then, I thought it was just people being mean and maybe not liking me. But it wasn't until I actually grew older that I actually developed some more of the language and the context around what was actually happening that really informed my lived experience. As I grew older and I was able to add this context, I realized that much of my experience wasn't about me. These were some of the things that I actually heard. Are you from here? You weren't born here, were you? English isn't your first language, is it? You should join the basketball team. You're probably really good at basketball. I'm sure you're a great singer. Why don't you sing for us? What's your background? Where are you from? You don't look Black. These were all things that I actually surprisingly didn't necessarily hear from children or from peers. I heard these things and I was on the receiving end of these comments from faculty members, teachers, and lunch monitors. I remember feeling uncomfortable when I would hear them, sometimes even sad, but I didn't have the words or the language to describe why I felt the way I did. I just knew that for whatever reason, I was different, and people would remind me of that on a daily basis. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that in the next slides, I do discuss conversations around sexual assault and violence against women. If this is something that you're not comfortable with, I'm going to wave like this as a signal, so you can just put me on mute. There is no imagery and anything, so you don't have to worry about that. But just as a quick trigger warning and content warning, this is something that's going to be discussed. If this is something that may trigger you or make you feel unsafe, put me on mute for a little bit and then check back in when you see this. Unfortunately, my experiences of feeling like I didn't belong carried through my educational career and throughout into my professional career. In the early days of being a recruiter, I remember receiving an email from a man asking me to fuck him after I interviewed him for a job. Or once at a company event, a senior leader at the organization I was working with asked me to suck his thumb in front of a bunch of folks that I worked with. And then there was that time an old boss rated me on a scale of 1 to 10 in front of someone that reported into me. The workplace felt invalidating, confusing, and at times downright hostile. And throughout most of my career, I just didn't necessarily understand why, but I accepted it because it was the ends to the means. I mean, we all exist in a capitalist society. I had to earn money to pay my rent and to support myself. So I would bite my teeth and grin through these situations and oftentimes tolerate them. Things like a sexual assault, where it was something I was on the receiving end of. Countless microaggressions, microinvalidations, and environmental invalidations, racist jokes, sexist comments, harassment, bullying, and social isolation. These were a part of my everyday experience. Today, I know that 1 in 4 women are considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers versus 1 in 5 men. While all women have been impacted, 3 major groups have experienced some of the largest challenges throughout the pandemic: working mothers and primary caregivers, women in senior management positions, and Black women. Women like me are underrepresented, underpaid, undervalued, underserved, and doing more emotional labor at work than any other group. This quote really makes me reflect a lot on my experience to date at work. And the quote is, "It isn't capital that creates economic growth, it's people. It isn't self-interest that promotes the public good, it's reciprocity. It isn't competition that produces our prosperity, it's cooperation." Nick is an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, and a billionaire. And this is a really inspiring quote for me because it makes me think about the type of work that I want to build and create for the future, but also for the team that I support today. As I reflect on my experiences, I can't help but wonder what got us here. As a Black woman that wants to see other women like me thrive at work without having to navigate a system that wasn't built with them in mind, I want to build better. As a newfound founder, I know that leaders have a lot more power to provoke change, long-term change, than maybe they have in the past. And as a woman, I have a lot of questions that I want answers to. The first question is work working? Some of the other questions that I have come from a place of, well, we built this, can't we change it? When did work start to feel so disenfranchising? Has it always been this way? I know I'm not alone in my experiences. I know I'm not alone in these feelings. So what can we do better? And acknowledging things like enslavement existed in the past and still exists in certain parts of the world today, and knowing how disenfranchised people from historically marginalized communities have been throughout history of work. I really wanted to understand where this came from. And lastly, the question that fuels my work on a daily basis, because HR work is hard. And if anyone who's tuning in today manages people, is an HR person, a recruiter, you know that navigating the last 2 and a bit years of building teams and really showing up for your team has been more challenging than ever. One thing that kept me moving through the last 2 years is this question: why doesn't work work for everyone? My purpose is wrapped into these 6 words, and it's something that fuels me on a daily basis to kind of keep going. So some practitioners focus on the future when thinking about how to build better workplaces. For me, as a lover of art and history, I knew it was important to learn about the past to properly understand how we got here. As a history enthusiast in all of its forms, I asked myself, when did work actually start? That question took me all the way back to the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. When they were presented with a choice, what I discovered was very interesting. For me, when we think about why we work, some blame Adam, some blame Eve, and I blame capitalism. When Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden for eating an apple, they were punished. And guess what the punishment was? I'd love for you to throw some answers in the chat. If anyone has read the Bible, you may be aware of this. If anyone's aware of the Bible, you may be aware of this. The punishment was work. Their punishment for denying God's wishes was work. For hundreds of years, people, mostly enslaved people, were told that work was the outcome of the original sin, aka the eating of the apple. People were told that work was always meant to be miserable because that was the repercussion of the original choice of Adam and Eve. In the Bible, there's a well-known quote condemning Adam and Eve to a life of work where they will never truly benefit from the fruits of their labor, and they will work to earn peace and serenity, hopefully in the afterlife. And for anyone that's studied or aware of art, a lot of history is focused on preparing for the afterlife because the life that they were currently living was actually centered so much around labor and work and building and pain. The quote folks reference as the first indication of work as a punishment goes like this: by the sweat of your brow, you will have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made, for you were made of dust, and to dust you will return. This rhetoric was used to justify unpaid labor and slavery for thousands of years. So work was a punishment. When did it shift towards means of joy and purpose? I studied art throughout post-secondary education, and I found that this piece of our work history, so to speak, was really compelling. The earliest record we have of paid work is something that you may be familiar with. Work and labor were a form of necessary and civic punishment until Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci came along. They embodied a new approach to work when they were commissioned to do a project that became world famous. I don't know about you, but I've been to the Sistine Chapel now twice. I've been lucky enough and privileged enough to go there. If you have, then you've probably reveled and marveled in the beauty of this creation. But the Sistine Chapel carries an important part of our history on the world of work. It was one of the first known projects where someone was hired and retained for their talents. This sparked an important shift in the way that people worked and the birth of the knowledge worker. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci came together and began to market their talents and would basically take RFPs, like our version of an RFP, for folks to work with them, and they would partner with the folks that would be basically the highest bidders. This was the birth of something special because they weren't enslaved and they weren't just working for the money. They did it because they wanted to create a sense of impact. They did it because it was prioritizing fulfillment and joy and creativity. And men like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo are kind of credited for the way that we work today. It was one of the first times that we saw a knowledge worker, which is pretty powerful. The irony, if you've been to Rome like me, you'll know that the Sistine Chapel is surrounded by a lot of beautiful creations that you can marvel at and experience that were actually created at the hands of unpaid labor and that were built on the backs of slaves. And I think that this is very interesting because I think that when we reflect on the history of work, specifically the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo's and the Leonardo da Vinci's of the world, why were they paid and others weren't? There's a common joke, and I think that if anyone's been on one of those cheesy tours through Rome, you'll realize the joke that they often use is, Rome wasn't built in a day. And they actually challenge what our general understanding is of that quote. And at the time, essentially meant that it takes a long time to build something great. But really, when you analyze it a little bit deeper, the understanding is we could never build Rome today, even with all of our technological advances and everything that we have at our fingertips, and the fact that we are far more advanced in terms of how we build structures than we were at that time. The reason why this is interesting is because we couldn't afford to build Rome today because of the labor costs, the unionizing, benefits, the fringe costs of having employees. Because this was unpaid free labor, they were able to build it faster and quicker, and they were also able to build it without the cost that would be associated with building Rome today. So work evolved from punishment and civic duty to much more tedious and to be a bit more of a nuisance for folks. In 1844, anyone that's familiar with Karl Marx finished his economic and philosophy manuscript of 1844. This manuscript was really interesting because it was really a series of his impassioned and at the time controversial notes on capitalism. Marx was one of the biggest critics of capitalism and attacked capitalism for years. A lot of his life work was actually dedicated to this. He felt capitalism held people back from doing meaningful and fulfilling work. And what's interesting about Marx is one would think that he actually criticized capitalism because he felt as though it would exploit people or take advantage of them. But he actually didn't care much about that. He was a critic of capitalism because he felt that it held people back from doing interesting work and really kind of helping them to develop their characteristics and their personality. And ultimately, he felt that capitalism and the majority of work people did under capitalism was boring. Karl Marx was a philosopher, economist, and a journalist. His ideas are still relevant in reference to this day. Marx wasn't respected or appreciated during his time. 2 decades after he passed away, his work actually was embraced by communities. He believed capitalism was bad for people because it made work alienating, insecure, unstable, and bad for capitalists too because it was hard to sustain. I acknowledge that Marx is a controversial figure for sure, especially acknowledging everything that's going on in the world today. For many reasons, when he died, only 12 people actually showed up to his funeral because he was that disliked. But he believed that instead of interpreting the world, we need to change it. And I can really agree and identify with that quote. So when did work shift, right? Was there any other work evolutions that took place? There's a very interesting time during 1899, which I have a warm, fuzzy feeling towards because I think that it is this small pocket of time where work wasn't necessarily seen as the end-all be-all. It was in 1899, there was a book written about the theory of the leisure class, and it basically captured, it was a popular piece of literature that captured this evolving community of folks that would hit a certain level of success and were like, okay, I have enough, I'm done. There was no push for more consumption. There was no need for buying more homes or building more property or having more land. It was reaching a certain level of success meant that you would actually move into leisure. You would ride horses, you would play games, you would go on boat rides, whatever during that time. But this person that wrote this piece of literature, he wrote that the characteristic feature of leisure class is the conspicuous exemption from useful employment. With a few decades later from that, everything changed. So we had about like 20 years of time where people were engaging meaningfully in leisure and holding boundaries, I guess, and doing things centered around rest and joy. The working class almost embraced the idea of rest, but capitalism had other plans. Less than 2 decades later, we saw a shift in propaganda, a shift in conversations, and this reemergence of the focus on do more, produce more work. So folks that were idle then, for example, folks that were like just enjoying the fruits of their labor and enjoying the work that they had put in and the wealth that they had acquired, were expected to continue to work. And there was these capitalist kind of communities that actually developed that were centered around propelling and putting focus on the people that are most successful. So these were people like business owners, people that cared about accounting and finance and bookkeeping. This was an interesting shift because now what happened was people that were unemployed were now looked at in a negative way. Whereas 20 years prior to that, that wasn't the case. And this piece of literature was a big part of shifting that adoption. So enter the Industrial Revolution, the work revolution that changed everything quicker than it ever had before. And I think that when we think about where we're at today in 2022 and what had happened specifically with the world of work in 2020, evolutions within the workplace have happened relatively slowly over time. We've had big shifts, but oftentimes it's taken hundreds or thousands or decades to get to the point where we've adopted new ways of working. That's been changing, and that gap between what we do now versus what we're going to be doing in the future is becoming shorter and shorter. When factories got bigger, they required more support for order. Employees were used as instruments towards execution and productivity. People moving to the office work started actually with developing the support around the work that people were doing in offices and in factories. So what we saw was these massive kind of factories and infrastructure that were being created, but then around that we had the emergence of the office worker, people that would do accounting and bookkeeping and general kind of support for the infrastructure of these organizations. The Industrial Revolution inspired a shift to productivity, and technological advances were making it easier to exploit workers. This was when a new work revolution was inspired. There was a serious call for action because things really escalated quite quickly. People gathered, marched, and protested for a 40-hour work week, which is equivalent to a 5-day work week, so they could find more balance and have more enjoyment with their life. This was the birth of unionized environments and organized labor. In 1926, Henry Ford was the first to standardize a 5-day work week. Instead of prevalent 6 days or 7 days a week where people were working 90 to 100 hours a week, they shifted to a stabilized 49-hour work week while maintaining the wages that folks had got prior. As factories grew and offices were required to support them, more and more people started to enter the workforce. And what we had with this was more and more inequities that were entered into the workforce as well. Because what we found was the representation within the workplace was shifting and changing. And I mean, under capitalism, we don't really care how many or who participates. It's just a matter of how far they climb and what they achieve. This is actually an office from the 1950s. Spaces were open, dress code was business professional, and generally speaking, there was next to no emphasis on cultivating spaces for creativity, connection, collaboration, and fun. What I think is really interesting is that tech about 10 years ago was like, often open office spaces, this is what it's all about, but it had already existed in the 1950s. So Herman Miller actually had a vision for something better. And like most designers, he was thinking, okay, I want a workplace that's inviting and encourages creativity and connection and helps space for individuality. I want people to come to work and work in a way that's unique to them. And then he created what was known as the Action Office. And like most things, designers and architects had a vision for something better, but capitalism said no, thanks, like thanks, but no thanks. We have something else in mind. Herman Miller dreamed of flexible spaces that would support how people wanted to work. That intention was to inspire support the work that people were doing versus diminish it. And instead, we got something that looked a little like this. What started as an intention to build work solutions for everyone's unique needs turned into one-size-fits-all solutions, AKA cubicles. And I don't know about you, but I spent many years working in a cubicle, and it was definitely a drab moment in my professional career and adventure. So when the early 2000s rolled around, technology changed the way we work forever. People could work more efficiently and productivity went way up. Sure, there was still a lack of representation and folks from marginalized communities were still fighting for basic labor rights, but work was becoming more fun, right? The birth of the PC and the first Apple computer and the dot-com boom had companies for the first time ever competing on a national scale to hire the best talent to join their teams. This was the first time where we actually saw the emergence where organizations had to put a lot of emphasis and work into recruiting and hiring and retaining people to stay with them. So what better way to attract the best and brightest minds to join your team than making work fun? So that's what they did. They rebranded work and the spaces folks would work in, and they tried to make it fun. This is when we saw the emergence of ping pong tables, slides, on-site hairdressers, snack rooms, and other perks with the fixture of the early 2000s workplace. To me, it felt like, let's do everything we can to keep people here longer. If we distract them with shiny things, they'll be more likely to stay and hopefully do more work. With more technology, everything was centered around what can we do? What can we create? What can we invent next? How can we innovate, disrupt, and challenge the status quo? Tech companies of the early 2000s doubled down on a need for engagement from their people. They did this because for the first time ever, hiring was becoming really hard, and they wanted people to feel comfortable at work and, hopefully stay as long as they possibly could. But work wasn't really built for everyone. And as I explored the history of work, one thing became very clear. Work was predominantly made up of white, non-disabled, het cis men. And for most of history of work, most of us weren't even a part of it. All of the evolutions were centered around the needs of the employer and the system of capitalism than the needs of their people. And we centered a lot of the work that we were doing around rebranding and creating comfort so people would work more versus people would get more out of work. So why doesn't work work for everyone? Well, it wasn't built with most of us in mind. And I think that when I reflect back on my own experiences, it's becoming more clear that the behaviors that perpetuate systems of oppression don't stop when we enter an office space or a Zoom chat or a virtual space where we're working and coordinating and collaborating with people. The real answer is it's not bad bosses, boring office spaces, not enough fun at work, or a lack of exciting perks like slides or ping pong tables that make work kind of shitty. The real answer is systems of oppression and the very obvious power dynamics that exist at work is the reason why work doesn't work for everyone. And as I reflected on history, other than a few work revolutions that were brought on by the pain of protest, there was no real constant effort to change systems of oppression that impact the way that we work and the way that we live beyond the workplaces that we enter. So what is oppression? It's important to look at the foundation before we look at the building. Analyzing systems of oppression allows us to fully understand the breadth of depth of discrimination. It gives us historical and analytical ways to truly understand how we got to where we are today. So what are these systems of oppressions and how they impact us? According to Simon Fraser Public Research Group, systems of oppression are discriminatory institutions, structures, norms, to name a few, that are embedded in the fabric of our society. All of the isms are a form of oppression. And we cannot have racism without oppression, and discrimination and non-inclusive systems cannot exist, right? Because they come and they're rooted in oppression. So when we discuss oppression, we are recognizing that oppression has influence over social acts and the experiences of people within the workplace. So what are we up against? This is the big question. When Bloom works with organizations and we talk about building better workplace experiences, this is the biggest question we get. How do we change it? The answer is this big map. It's a big one, and there's a lot there, and we're not even capturing all the isms that exist. But it's virtually impossible to view one oppression, such as sexism or homophobia, in isolation because they are all connected. Sexism, racism, homophobia, classism, ableism, anti-Semitism, ageism, they are all interconnected. They're linked by power and control. So to eliminate one oppression successfully by a movement has to include other work to eliminate them all, or else success always is limited and incomplete. So if you take a look at this diagram, we see a triangle, and with oppression at its base and harmful outcomes at its apex and oppressive systems at its apex, we can kind of see the ripple effect that is caused by systems of oppression. I'm going to take a sip of water or coffee because I'm certain my words. I'm getting really excited. So examples of harmful outcomes range from acts of microaggressions, inadequate health outcomes, disenfranchisement of people of color, or even micro-invalidations as it relates to environmental pieces, like perhaps not having adequate accommodations for folks that may have disabilities, so they can't even get into your office space. I like to think of oppression as the foundation of a house, with all the beams of the house functioning as isms. Without oppression, the beams cannot stand. However, by removing one of the beams, the house can still stand. So this is the reason why we need to think about all of the systems of oppression if we're wanting to build better and more inclusive workplaces for folks. Using an understanding of oppression, we can acknowledge how it shapes our multiple dimensions of our everyday life, especially at work, and specifically the everyday lives of people that may hold identities that aren't the same as ours. It can impact people on an individual level, on an interpersonal level, on an institutional level, and on a structural level. And the same thing goes with how they're perpetuated. These systems can be perpetuated on an individual level. For example, when the man asked me to suck his thumb at a conference, at a team meeting, or on an interpersonal level, if I'm on the receiving end of a microaggression at work, even if the person had no intention of harming me or saying something that would hurt my feelings, they're still having an impact on my experience at work. Or on an institutional level, this could look like working within an organization and not seeing yourself represented in senior leadership, or only having one woman on a leadership team. And there could be a structural level. So this could be something irrelevant to systems. So perhaps you have a pregnancy leave policy, but on a parental leave policy that's open to all folks to benefit from building and creating a family. At Bloom, we believe and acknowledge that systems of oppression exist, which uphold and perpetuate all the isms that people are on the receiving end of at work. We believe in naming the elephant in the room, which is capitalism, is an economic system in which we all operate, and it has existed since commerce started. And it is underridged by the other isms. It relies on labor exploitation and greatly benefits from some over others, namely the labor and the equity-seeking groups to be benefit privileged groups. And yet Bloom charges for its services. We do make a profit at Bloom. But the truth is that there's no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. But participating in capitalism does not mean that we cannot critique it. So the not so great truth is, since oppression is systemic, it normalizes biases and prejudices and reinforces those biases through discrimination in individuals. It feeds into our daily experience. So it takes a lot of work to dismantle these systems. If we want to build better workplace experiences, we need to start with building anti-oppressive workplaces. That is the answer towards building better workplaces for everyone. This starts with foundational changes to policies, internal guides, and people systems, like how you hire, promote, and retain your people. And then you need to look at developing anti-oppressive behaviors through training, building awareness, and taking sustained action. At Bloom, we observe companies with not so inclusive habits that perpetuate systems of oppression every single day. It's very hard not to, because it is like a web that we're all interacting with, and it is in us and external outside of us. This could look like conducting backdoor references. So you're interested in hiring someone, and instead of getting consent in terms of who you get a reference from, you reach out to a previous employer because you're friends with them. It could be referring to your team as guys and addressing folks in gendered language. It could be me not making an effort to have diverse representation of candidates throughout your interview process, and maybe just hiring the one person that you met with versus actually taking time to meet with several folks. You actually have diverse representation and an opportunity to hire more diverse people to join your team. It could look like not having accessible facilities or terminating people without providing meaningful feedback beforehand. If we want to build better, we need to address our internal habits that perpetuate systems of oppression. The good news is that we can break old habits. If anyone's familiar with Adam Grant's work, there's a lot of information around how we can actually rebuild new habits. But this takes practice, and it takes a lot of effort and work, and it takes awareness. So you need to start from a place of education. Work has evolved a bunch of times since the days of Adam and Eve. We evolved from punishment to pride. We worked to serve and support our community. Then we moved to paid, maybe not fairly or consistently, to productivity. There was an emphasis on production, efficiency, and to play, where there was a focus on creating more enjoyable environments where people were engaged and stayed longer, to now focus on purpose. People care about the impact that they make at work, and they want fulfilling work. So work, like most things under capitalism, has gone through many rebrands to make it more attractive and interesting and less of a necessity as it really is. So what's next? I believe the future of work is a practice and not a prediction. We hear a lot of folks talking about the future of work. When we talk about the future of work and what that means, this is what it means to us. Work, like most things under capitalism, it means that it's the practice of dismantling systems of oppression and building work that works for everyone. That's what the practice of building the future of work looks like. I think that saying that we know what the future of work is without actually practicing what we believe the future of work should be is performative and kind of inefficient. You can differentiate how this looks like by some of the prompts that I've shared here. It's a practice of taking action, building your awareness, offering learning opportunities for your team. It's the practice of actually identifying some of the oppressive systems that you currently perpetuate within your organization and dismantling them. To change work forever, we need social solidarity for everyone. And I think that this is one of the most compelling shifts that I've seen in the workplace today. People now more than ever are thinking critically about how work has been built for everyone and who it isn't built for. And as Bloom does a lot of work in this space around education and training, and also by way of advisory and consulting, I know that there are folks that are acting in or engaging in acts of allyship more than ever to remove barriers from some of the most historically marginalized communities. The world of work used to change and evolve over decades, and sometimes it took hundreds of years. If the pandemic and March of 2020 taught us anything, it's that we have a tremendous capacity to evolve and change overnight. And we're lucky to have access to technology and tools to make that accessible to more people than ever before. Instead of waiting for the next shoe to drop, we can start to build better and dismantle systems of oppression today. So what can you do about it? You can learn about systems of oppression and how they impact your workplace. You can reflect on how you've perpetuated or upheld these systems in the past. You can then plan on how to remove barriers for historically marginalized groups and communities and create a plan to take sustained action towards creating a more inclusive, equitable, and just workplace experience for others. At Bloom, we believe, sorry, my mouth, I shouldn't have drank coffee. My mouth is slurring. At Bloom, we believe that the world of work should work for everyone. So leaders, there's an obvious power dynamic at work that always tips the benefit in leaders' favors, and specifically in the employer's favor. You have a unique opportunity to use your power and privilege at work to provoke real change. This is harder for folks to identify as marginalized within leadership roles because they're seen as having skin in the game. So if you are part of a dominant group, AKA white, het, cis man, and you're sitting here and you're listening to this conversation, it would be amazing if you could use your power and privilege to remove barriers for others. And this is true for everyone that holds more power and privilege than others within organizations. Change that will result in more people like me and other folks from marginalized communities to not only be included but thrive at work starts with all of us. When I reflect on the history of work and I become more aware of the folks that shape the system of work, I understand why work has always felt disenfranchising for me and for others until I started my own company. At Bloom, we believe that we can build better. Sorry, I'm getting emotional because I'm just thinking about my team. But we're a small privately owned business. We're a bootstrapped company. We partner with values-aligned organizations we know are taking strides to building better workplace experiences. Sorry. I don't know, I'm getting emotional. I was just thinking about the experiences that I had. It just hit me. I feel like we've created a bit of a safe haven at Bloom. And I protect it because I want to keep it that way. Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. So I prioritize putting people first. In fact, I only started taking a salary at Bloom last week, and I paid my people first long before I paid myself. In a service-based company, we've opted out of burning out folks or having them available at all hours of the day to serve our clients. We offer a 4-day work week, and we, since our inception, it's been 3+ years now, and we offer a lot of different flexible ways in which people can work with Bloom. This is us. Every person at Bloom that works at Bloom identifies as part of a historically marginalized community. This wasn't on purpose. This is just what happened. The majority of folks at Bloom are Black, and we practice asking for help, calling in folks, and holding space for when life happens. So here comes my shameless plug after I almost cried. If you want to learn more about how you can navigate systems of oppression, DEI work, or other important aspects of building better and more inclusive experiences from us, you can. We offer Bloom Academy. You can learn more about how you can actually dismantle and remove these barriers for folks and create better workplace experiences. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this work because it is such an integral part of our daily experiences in our lives. Our approach is centered in grace, growth, curiosity, empathy, anticipation, and action. And you'll be able to learn from world-class facilitators, real learning in virtually in real time. And you'll be able to join a community of folks that are also wanting to build better. So my question to you is, are you ready to grow? And readiness is the most important part. You may not necessarily know how to do these things or intimately understand how to dismantle systems of oppression, but the readiness for you as an individual, and then hopefully by way of that, your team, is the most important factor in pushing this work forward. These are some of the organizations that were ready to partner with Bloom. And you'd be in really great company in the event that you were to work with us, or if you just do it on your own. So I want to leave you with this. How can you use your privilege to build a more inclusive workplace experience for others? Here are some of the prompts that I want you to reflect on. Learn what privilege you have. Reflect on how you can use that privilege to support others. Develop a plan on how you can take action. And of course, follow your plan and continue to take sustained action beyond it. Thank you for your time this morning and for sharing your energy with me today. I appreciate the patience, and I'm not going to apologize for getting a little bit upset there, because I think it's 2022 and women need to stop apologizing for feeling very real emotions. But we are running a code at the moment. If you want to participate and sign up for Bloom Academy, you can join with Avery 20. It will give you 20% off of our cohort, and it's launching April 5th, so it's coming up. And we have a specific context-specific learning experience for HR practitioners, recruiters, and people that want to learn more about how to create more inclusive workplaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Avery. That was amazing. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and for sharing your experience with us. That is just, you can see the comments. Everyone is talking about how great the session was. And people would love to connect with your organization, maybe to find out how they can sign up and maybe ask a few questions. So be expecting a few messages from the people in the chats. But thank you so much, and looking forward to connecting with you after this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm looking at the comments now and I'm like going to start crying all over again. I can't talk about my team without being emotional. I just love them so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we have a short break, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you.